That makes it hard. I was just saying, John Cruz, I see you're in Nahant from the background in your picture there.
Can't hear you, John. You're muted.
John, we couldn't hear you.
You couldn't hear me?
No, we couldn't hear John respond.
I see you're unmuted, John. I see your mouth moving, but still couldn't hear you.
Tony, when you get the chance, can you make me a co-host so I can share my screen?
Yeah.
Thanks.
John, have you figured out your audio yet?
I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Mhm.
Thank you so much for bearing with me. It has been a hot mess express with audio stuff on this computer all day.
Well, it's awfully windy in Nahant right now, John.
So,
Jim was saying it looked like you had Nahant as your background, John.
I do, yeah. It's from one of the pictures we took during our site visit out there.
Ah, good man.
You pay the royalties on those?
My picture. Hopefully, I'm not paying royalties to myself. Sounds like complicated accounting to me.
I think we have everyone on. I know Pat wasn't able to join us tonight, but I think I see everyone else.
What about Lynn?
Oh, right.
Oh, that's right. I don't see Lynn.
Lynn is crucial.
Give me a second. I'll try calling it.
Who is Alice Kay? Is that the real estate person from Little Nahant?
Carrie Alice Collins. Carrie Alice Collins. Must have.
Okay.
Riley, bring me the clicker. The clicker.
I got a voicemail from Lynn, so I'll send her a text. And I think we could probably get started. All right, so thank you all for being on the call tonight. Thank you all for for those of you that are part of the committee. Thank you for either volunteering or offering your time to be appointed to represent the other committees around the town. And thank you to MAPC for joining us. And of course, anyone, any residents that are on. While there was a certain number of spots on the committee, I know in speaking with Mark as the representative from the Board of Selectmen, and this being a Board of Selectmen subcommittee, his intentions are to make this as open and public of a process as possible. So even, voices of residents who aren't on the committee will be heard just as much as those that are on the committee. The public process here is crucial to our success. So, but thank you all that have dedicated your time to the committee. What I just wanted to provide a little bit of background. and really kind of hand it over to MAPC and allow them to introduce themselves and kind of help guide us through, the process that we're going to be going through on this with this committee. I think tonight is really just kind of laying the groundwork of what's to come. And as Mark had mentioned, he's going to be the recording secretary tonight, but for the next meeting, the committee should appoint, a chairperson, a vice chairperson, and a recording secretary. And I would be happy to, whoever's ends up being the, recording secretary, I'd be happy to sit down with them and, talk to them a little bit about, how to write minutes and how to schedule meetings and how to operate the Zoom account. It's all very simple, but takes a little bit of time to go through. So,
Tony, can I ask how difficult is it to get videos up of our meetings online quickly?
Not very difficult, actually. So MAPC, as they're going to speak to it a little bit, they're actually part of the scope of their contract is to create a website for this process that's going to be linked to nahant.org. And then all of our committee meetings get uploaded to Zoom, and this committee's we'll have a playlist under the Town of Nahant's YouTube account. So we'll have a link from our website, from the website that MAPC creates, right to that YouTube playlist where anybody can watch the recordings. And it probably takes us, it depends on how busy the day is at the town hall, but we could usually do it within 24 hours.
Great. On that website, will you be able to communicate sort of in writing and put stuff up on the website so that in a sense it's open to everyone, committee members and the public? The idea I'm trying to get around the limitations of committee members not being able to talk to one another and the sort of isolation that comes along with that. So if there is a common public website on which conversations can be held, I'm wondering if that's appropriate or legal.
Well, so open meeting law, stipulates that you really can't be deliberating with another committee member outside of a posted meeting. And deliberation could be Jim Walsh saying, I'm for affordable housing, or I like housing. That's any simple statement of opinion could be to another member, could be considered deliberation and an open meeting law violation. So
Except that posting of a document without comments ought to be outside of that prohibition. So I think that's what Jim is concerned about, to be able to post things for everybody to see and absorb and use without having to, if you will, physically gather and pass around a piece of paper to look at.
Well, you certainly can share information like that. It would be like if Jim sent a document to the committee, and then Mike, you responded, said, thanks, Jim, looks great. That's where the violation occurred. If you just if Jim sent it over to you and said, hey guys, take a look at this, like to discuss it next week at the meeting, that's fine. And then at that meeting, you could say, hey, we should put this on the website, so it's that sort of thing.
So expressions of valuation, either favorable, unfavorable, whatever, even if they're open to all on the website in real time, they're prohibited because they did not occur during a convened meeting. Is that right?
I would think so. If it's not, it's certainly close enough that it's not worth it.
Okay.
I can also just chime in, and so my name's Christian Brandt. I work at MAPC as the community engagement manager, and on the websites that we host, we will we can put up any public documents and recordings. So for other projects, we sometimes will put up meeting minutes, although those are usually hosted in the towns, like where the town puts those normally. But we can also put recordings. I see this as live streaming. We can just grab the link for the live stream and put it onto the website. We also will be putting up any relevant documents from the process on the website. But just to answer, I think one part of your question, Jim, the website that MAPC designs is really, it's not an interactive website in the sense that people won't be able to leave comments on the website about anything that's posted there. They certainly can get in touch with MAPC staff or town staff via the website. But it doesn't have like a comment board functionality that you might get in something like Facebook, if that is what you were wondering. It's really like a one-way information providing tool.
Right. I mean, my basic concern is that the public be involved, the public be informed, and that a public conversation that we can all be part of should be out there. So my thought was that if there was something online where you could post documents or statements or what have you, then the conversation within the community is improved in that way.
I agree with Jim with that, because I think public outreach is going to be crucial in this process. We want everyone to have a voice during this process. So like maybe without having Facebook that be the main way people in Nahant talk to each other, some sort of like chat room that people can get involved without, the ugliness of social media.
Well, one thing that we're working on, one thing I'm working on my end is creating an email account for this committee that all of your emails would be linked to it. So if anybody sent an email to the Housing Committee, it would automatically be forwarded to all of you. So you would each see it. It's the reply that would cause an open meeting law violation. So you have to be careful of that. But that public discussion, I don't disagree with you either. It's just that open meeting law factor that we have to be mindful of.
So
But,
input from the community in terms of replies, so forth, there's no prohibition on that because it's not actions of committee members.
correct.
It is simply expressions of valuation or favorability or whatever on the part of committee members that take place outside of a convened meeting is the
Yeah,
problem.
and-
Is that right?
So residents would have their ability to come to these meetings, make their comments. They could email the committee at their own convenience. If we get to a point where we're thinking about a survey or something like that, we could potentially put that on the site, whether it be ours or MAPC's. But those, we can certainly discuss different tools and techniques to reach out, and get feedback from the public. So I want to just give a quick overview of how we got to where we are today. We have the Board of Selectmen applied for Community Preservation Committee funds for $75,000 last year for to be used towards this process. We've hired MAPC with a majority of those funds to help put together a housing plan. And we're using a small amount of those funds to also, we hired Stantec, a firm that is helping us go through a GLAM analysis. And John, I hope you can, when you go through your process here, you can give an overview of 40B and the thresholds, 10% and 1.5% GLAM. But long story short, under chapter 40B, every town's required to have a certain amount of affordable housing in it. And that can be met a couple different ways. But the two things I'm talking about is one is 10% of your housing stock, which is a simple formula to calculate, and we don't meet it. We have 1,365 units, I think, something around there. So our 10% would be 136. John will give you the correct numbers, I'm sure, if he has them. Another way to meet it is through the general land area percentage, which is 1.5% of your developable land is dedicated to affordable housing. That is a more complicated formula that we don't know. I have doubts that we meet that 1.5%, but I wanted to hire an outside firm to go through that process for us formally and make sure that we check that box, because sooner or later we'll be asked about that, and it's good for us to complete that exercise anyhow. Separately, we submitted an application to the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs for a planning grant. I actually submitted the application the day of town meeting last year, and we received the grant with the help of MAPC, and we're using those funds to contract with MAPC to help us with the multifamily zoning requirement under Chapter 3A for MBTA communities. That's a new law. MBTA communities fall into a number of different categories. We'll get into it. So the town of Nahant has a certain requirement for zoning. Different than Chapter 40B, which is a number of units, right? This is actually a zoning requirement under Chapter 3A. And it actually doesn't have anything to do with affordability. Unless something changed, John, you can correct me, but it's actually just simply multi-family zoning. We worked with MAPC to provide recommendations to the Department of Housing when they were going through the public process of developing those rules. They accepted a lot of our comments, and really the burden, I would say, from the original guidelines has been lessened because of a lot of those comments that our community and many other communities like ours put forward. And I think we're in a position now where we could accomplish both of these requirements, affordability and multifamily zoning, through this process. They could actually, we could, in other words, we could zone an area town that's for multifamily and it's affordable, and we could meet both requirements. So that's how we got MAPC. That's John, Christian, and Alex came to Nahant about a month ago. I said to the three of them, I'm not signing anything until you come to Nahant and smell the air and meet the people and walk the streets. And so they spent the afternoon with Mark and I, and I think I'll let them speak for themselves, but I think after a few hours driving around town and seeing the sights and bumping into people along the way, I think they got a pretty good feel for Nahant and our community. So
Just to clarify, Tony, the 3A requirements are totally independent of 40B, correct? 3A has to do with housing density within the reach of the MBTA area, And failure to conform to that makes the town ineligible for certain grants, et cetera. Whereas if we fail to comply with 40B, then private developers are able to thumb their nose at certain zoning restrictions, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So John had sent out some introduction questions to the committee. I'm gonna let John take it from here and introduce his team, and then maybe go around the room with the rest of the members of the committee, and then John and Christian can take us, through the rest of the meeting.
Great. Actually, if you could just make me co-host so I can share my
Oh,
screen,
yeah,
that'd be great.
sorry.
That's okay.
All right, try sharing your screen now.
Ah,
Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
yep.
Right.
Awesome. All you, John.
All right, thank you so much, Christian, and thank you, Tony, for that wonderful introduction. And of course, thank you to all the members of the public and the members of the committee that are here to join us tonight. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, and we're looking forward to a really productive conversation and getting our ducks in a row for moving things forward here. Christian, if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide, we'll talk about what the agenda is going to look like for today. We're going to introduce ourselves from MAPC. You're already familiar with the town staff. We're going to ask the housing subcommittee members to introduce themselves, and one of the prompts that you were emailed earlier we'll ask you to talk about there. We're going to tell a little bit about MAPC, who we are and what we do, because we recognize that not everybody's familiar with our work. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the HPP overview and schedule. We got into the overview a little bit before, but we're going to talk a little bit more about just some housing production plan elements, some 101 sorts of background information that's helpful for everybody, how the process moves forward, and then discussing the 3A zoning component of all of this and how we see this moving forward schedule-wise. We're going to talk about what the roles and expectations are of the committee. We're going to talk about the things that we're going to be working on next, including things that we're going to be doing at MAPC, things that we're going to be asking of you all for next steps. And then we're going to open things up for questions and discussion. Of course, this is our presentation portion of the agenda. Other things to be considered for this evening are the things that Tony mentioned before, making sure that we establish a chairperson for this committee. I guess it makes sense to hear all about what we're going to be doing and what the roles and expectations are before we volunteer or voluntold somebody to step up for this. And I think we'll probably allow for some comments from the general public at the end as well. Christian, next slide. So my name is John Cruz. I'm a senior housing and land use planner with AICP. And Alex, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. It's nice to be with you. Alex Koppelman here, Regional Housing and Land Use Planner with MAPC. I've been with the agency for about 4 years, and I actually live down the road in Lynn.
And Christian, can you say hello to everybody?
Hey everyone, my name is Christian Brandt. I am MAPC's Community Engagement Manager. So I'm excited to be with you, even more excited because of the comments some of you mentioned earlier about community engagement. That's my bread and butter. So yeah, I'm excited to be with you all on this project.
Thank you so much, Christian. If you could go ahead and advance to the next slide, we'll start talking to our Housing Advisory Committee members. These are in here alphabetical by first name. We're not playing any kind of favorites here, but we're going to go ahead and start with Heather. And Christian, if you could hit the right arrow one more time, we'll see the prompt questions come up. We'd like to hear your name, your affiliation, kind of what you do around town, what your involvement's been in, and what was the favorite thing about the neighborhood where you grew up. And we're going to get started with Heather, and I can't tell if her cat's still there or not.
John,
No, my cat has just left for
wait,
now.
John, Heather, right before you go, John, also, I don't know if you saw my email earlier today, but Dave Wilson has also joined us tonight, and he was appointed from the Housing Authority. So if we could add them to your list when you get a chance.
I did see, I did see that. My apologies, Dave. I was not able to modify the PowerPoint before the start of this meeting. Hopefully you got the email that I sent over that had the additional information.
Dave would be first, by the way.
It would be fun. So let's go ahead and start with you, Dave.
Hi, Dave Wilson. I'm representing the Nahant Housing Authority. I've worked for the town of Nahant for over 40 years now. And I'm a native in town, and I expressed my concern about housing in the town because, you know, a lot of elderly people here and they want to stay here. They don't want to move out.
Fantastic. And Heather?
Hi, I'm Heather Goodwin. I am a small business owner and an artist and native Nahanter. What I liked about growing up in my neighborhood, which is essentially all of Nahant, since it was so small, was basically the freedom of being a child here. It always felt safe. My dad was a lobsterman, so I grew up on the wharf, and I loved watching the fishermen come and go, and that was part of the fabric of our community. I also loved the traditions that my father, who grew up here, had passed on to me. Things like 4th of July, Memorial Day Parade. It was always very important to our family that we kept these traditions going and always participated in them. And my grandfather lived here as well. So the fact that it was multi-generational and that I had family members here, young and old, was always very important to me. But most of all, I would say even now, like my connection to the nature that Nahant has to offer, the sea, the green spaces, the trees, those things are just very special to me and my family.
Thank you so much, Heather. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were a real estate agent. Jim,
So, okay. I have only lived in Nahant for 49 years, relative newcomer. For 12 of those years, I lived next door to Heather and her sister and her brother and her mother and her father. But I grew up in Connecticut. And I would say that when that question was asked, what I first thought of was when I was a little boy, the person next door was a Latinx person. Across the street, there was a Black family. Around the corner and down the street was another Black family. An Irish family across the street, and the Italians on the back. It was a very diverse neighborhood. Later in life, for several years, I lived in a minority neighborhood in New Haven. So when I moved to Nahant, sight unseen, never having seen it before, having arrived here at night, I woke up the next morning, looked around and said, whoa, I'm staying here. And I've loved this place ever since. The biggest contrast, of course, is that, we are not we are not diverse at all racially and with certain nationalities. And that I'm perfectly willing to accept that. And I would not think it's in anybody's interest to try to force anything. But I do miss the fact that I love going to Market Basket because it's such a diverse place to be around other kinds of people. But here at a certain point, I began to get involved with the community. I was first elected to the Housing Authority. I served as a selectman. I was chairman of the planning board, chairman of the Finance and Advisory Committee, chairman of the local Democratic Town Committee, chairman of the Cultural Council. And in my spare time, I try to read books. But I'm deeply committed to this place. It's a matter of tremendous good fortune that I ended up here. And I want to do everything I can to help preserve what we can and to evolve in ways that are fair and just to everyone.
Thank you so much, Jim. Well said. And it looks like Lynn has just joined the call. Lynn, we're still doing introductions of the committee members, and it looks like you joined right on cue. We're asking everyone to say their name, what their affiliation is, and what your favorite thing was about the neighborhood where you grew up.
Lynn may need to unmute herself.
Everything good, Lynn? Can you hear us? Looks like we might be having some microphone technical difficulties on Lynn's end. I certainly understand. I was there not too long ago myself. We're going to come back to you in just a minute, Lynn. And in the meantime, we're going to ask Mark Coleman to introduce himself.
Hi, John. Thanks for putting this together tonight. I'm a member, currently I'm a member of the Board of Selectmen. Housing is a very important reason why I ran for this office. Prior to being a member of the Board of Selectmen, I served for 17 years as town administrator. I've joined on many committees and boards in the town throughout my life. I grew up in this town. In fact, I think my neighborhood where I grew up was, I grew up in affordable housing in Nahant, probably one of the only members on the committee that actually lived in affordable housing in Nahant on Spring Road. At the time, it was called Veterans Housing, but it's still part of our affordable housing in Nahant. And what I remember most about that, about growing up there, was all of the houses where there were duplexes connected to one another. And we were all about the same age. All the families and children were about the same age. And I think I said the other day at an event that it was great being able to walk outside your house and all your friends were there early in the morning, and you could say good night to them when you all went to bed about the same time. So it was very family oriented community. And as Heather said, Nahant in itself is a small community in itself. So, housing is very important to me. The affordability aspect of it, diversity, and also elderly housing is very important on my agenda as a member of the board. So I look forward to working with this committee. Thank you.
And thank you. Lynn, is your microphone working, or should we keep on moving? She just took her headphones off, so that's not a good sign. We'll keep moving. Michael.
I'll be happy to fill the gaps while Lynn gets organized. My name is Mike Raworth. I'm coming to you all from the Zoning Board of Appeals. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and the favorite thing about my neighborhood is I could ride my bike to the nearby creek where I could catch box turtles.
Very cool. Michelle?
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Capano. Like Heather, I am also a member that's grown up in this town. I would say a little bit about my background for folks that don't know. I currently work at Santander Bank as a senior executive in risk management. I've worked also in different areas around commercial and residential real estate, and have had done some activities around affordable housing, coming from my consulting background as well. My parents were in real estate. My mom was a realtor and my father was a real estate investor. So the affordable housing is something that as a young child, we grew up with, renting to tenants who had different means. And so was very much exposed to those tenants that were coming in with certain exceptions, whether it be state or federal. So it's important, I feel, that we do what we can for our community. I think it's important to give back. I've been working in different activities across the town for a number of years. And so this is just another area that I feel like I can give back and contribute. I think the one thing I can say about growing up in my neighborhood, I would say, was that family feeling. Like Mark said, you could go out your front door and see your friends. When the street lights went on, you knew you all needed to come home, and there was always an extra seat at our dinner table for someone that we were bringing home, whether it was from a play date, school, the beach. My mom was, great at always having, an extra seat at the table for dinner or lunch.
Mm.
Thank you so much. Patty?
Hi, everyone. I'm Patty Karras, and I am the current chair of the Johnson Elementary School. I grew up in Arlington, Massachusetts. As a young child, what stood out to me was the strong family neighborhood that I lived in, the green space, access to the library and the playgrounds, Mystic Valley Parkway and the trails. And when I was a bit older, when they built the Minuteman Bikeway, which I absolutely loved, I relocated out of Massachusetts to Virginia and Washington, D.C. for 12 years. And I decided in August of 2018, for personal reasons, to relocate back to Massachusetts. And I landed in Nahant with my young son, who was 7 years old at the time. I absolutely love it here. It's a wonderful, very welcoming community, and it's very important to me that I become actively involved, which is why I became a part of the school committee, and I'm very happy to serve on this committee as well, because I do strongly believe in affordable housing, in particular for the elderly.
Thank you so much, Patty. The next person on our list is Patrick O'Reilly. I don't think Patrick is here on the call tonight, so we're gonna bounce it back over to Lynn if she's still here. Lynn, you think you have your things worked out yet? If not, we can move forward and try to come back later.
If Lynn's isn't working, I'll introduce myself. I'm not actually a member of the committee. But I have a feeling I'm going to be with you guys along the way. So I'm Tony Barletta. I'm the town administrator. I was born and raised in Nahant as well. I got the best job in the world, working for the town that I grew up in, that has molded me in so many different ways. So to give back in my professional career is awesome. It's a great opportunity. And, I would say, I echo a lot of the comments of the members of the committee about, the neighborhoods and the feel that you have from Nahant. For me, the feeling, the causeway is the constant. Driving, there's nothing like driving into Nahant, driving over that causeway. You could be gone for 10 minutes. You could be gone for 2 weeks. Every time you drive over that causeway, luckily I get to do it every day. And when you finally get into Nahant, it's there's a feeling about it that I don't get anywhere else. So that's my neighborhood touch.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Tony. Lynn, any progress on your end? I see someone just joined us by phone as well. I'm not sure who that is. If you're a member of the committee, please go ahead and identify yourself. Otherwise, just hang out. Is that you, Lynn?
Hello, it's Lynn Spencer.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Please go on and continue.
I'm sorry?
So please continue.
So sorry, John. I joined late. I'm having trouble with my sound system, so I'm watching you on the screen and using my phone. So what's the question?
We want to hear who you are, what your affiliations are, and your favorite thing about the neighborhood where you grew up.
Okay. I'm Lynn Spencer. I am chairman of the Community Preservation Committee and a member of the Historical Commission. I was part of the team that advocated for the funding of this study. I'm not a good person to talk about a favorite thing in my neighborhood because I grew up in the country with no neighbors for a mile. So it's a very different kind of commentary. But I do live on Tri-Mountain Road, which is which is a neighbor to the military housing project, and I have strong feelings about providing housing opportunities for all.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for being flexible and working around us. I get the feeling that by the time we have all the Zoom stuff figured out, we won't need it anymore, but it is what it is. So thank you all for bearing with us on all of this. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Christian for the next couple of slides, and he's going to tell everyone a little bit about MAPC and the kind of work that we do here.
Great, thanks, John. Also just note that Lynn, I also grew up in the woods in Idaho, so really a different place than Nahant for sure. Not a beach within hundreds of miles, I can tell you that.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I just wanted to introduce all of us to MAPC. I'm sure some of us know, but also just for folks who might watch this later or who are watching on the live stream, MAPC is a public agency. We are the regional planning agency for the greater Boston region. You can see the map of MAPC's region before you. Nahant is part of a subregion within MAPC called the North Shore Task Force. In addition to being the community engagement manager at MAPC, I am also the coordinator for the North Shore Task Force. And so in both of those capacities, we work with Nahant in a variety of ways. Some of you might be familiar with us from the open space and recreation plan that we worked on. But MAPC really exists to help communities in our region with technical assistance related to urban planning tasks. So we have a bunch of sort of different types of services, but these are really our three core things that we do if you really boil it down. So we work on a lot of policy advocacy at the State House, but also locally with our communities. We provide shared services, technical assistance, and procurement services to our communities. And then we also develop plan and policy recommendations that are informed by both the advocacy and the technical assistance that we provide. So in terms of the types of topics that we work on, this is somewhat of an exhaustive list, but we have, these represent all of the different departments or divisions within the agency. And so we do lots of different kinds of work on public health, arts and culture planning, land use, housing, community engagement, transportation, etc. We have about 100 staff now. I think actually maybe it's more like 115. And sort of generally speaking, these are the topic areas that we cover. So unless John, you want to add anything else, I will turn it back to you.
I don't think I want to add anything else. Really, what we want to drive home is that we do a lot of stuff and we have a lot of in-house expertise. So while Alex, Christian, and myself are going to be the ones who are doing the primary work on this plan and who you'll be interfacing with regularly, we do have a whole team of experts who have our back at the agency and who are going to be working on this plan, who will be talking through to bounce ideas off of, things of that nature. So it's not just the three of us, rest assured. Moving on to Housing Production Plan 101 sort of stuff, and Tony covered a little bit of this earlier. What we want to do here is kind of everything in four big buckets, more or less. And the first one is to meet the local housing need. And this is going to be addressing all the wide range of unmet housing needs that are in the community of Nahant. We've heard people already kind of talking about concerns with elderly folks, low-income folks, family structure sorts of things. We're going to be continuing to work on a housing needs assessment to really see what the data says from the sources that we have available and what that looks like as far as putting that into a local context and seeing this is what we think everything looks like in Nahant, and this is what we need to do next to try to move forward and meet that need. The next thing is proactively influencing development, and that's going to be guiding the type, amount, and location of housing, while also doing a lot of work to try and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that the development that happens is friendly, it makes sense, it's the kinds of things that the community wants to see, and not a developer coming in and, as somebody said before, kind of just ignoring the local zoning and doing what they want. And that leads into the next point, compliance with Chapter 40B and 3A. We want to work towards that goal of 10% subsidized housing, and also with the 3A section of the MBTA community guidelines for multifamily. The last thing on this list is making sure that everything that we do, make sure that Nahant is eligible for the housing choice grants, MassWorks grants, other stuff that the state does. And for those of you who may be unaware or members of the public that don't get involved in a lot of housing stuff, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a whole host of various programs, grant-funded stuff, things that they do to try and help communities to advance their goals for housing and infrastructure and things like that. And we want to make sure that the residents of Nahant are getting their fair share of all of that money that goes out. Having a housing production plan is something that's certainly going to be able to help. It makes sure that whatever it is that you're saying that you want to do, that you have research and community engagement that supports these goals, and it's not just at the whim of whoever is in charge. And of course, the voice of the community matters as well. So it has a lot of things that really add to the weight of this process. And we can say, we went to the community, we asked them what they want to see, we heard from them, we talked to them, we put it into this document, and we're going to use that document to make asks, make policy decisions, make development decisions moving forward. Next slide, please, Christian. Next up here, we have a map that shows the MAPC region and where we have done housing production plans and what municipalities have chosen to either work with another firm or chosen not to do one. And we put together a substantial amount. It's a little bit more than a quarter of all the region's municipalities have had their HPP done by us. So it's something that really is within our wheelhouse. It's something we spend a lot of time doing. And it's something that we really pride ourselves on our expertise on, is understanding the housing challenges and how to make sure that this goes through and gets approved by the state as we go ahead and finish up the process towards the end here. Next slide. An HPP is comprised of a handful of different elements, and putting them into 3 buckets. The first one is the comprehensive housing needs assessment, which I touched on a little bit earlier. It's something that we're going to be able to use the recent census data for the municipalities, the existing housing stock information, look at all the different projections as far as what the population is going to look like, what the housing need is going to look like. How do we figure out what the needs of the housing are for the low and moderate income households, and also looking at all the development constraints, which means things that we have to be able to work around because you can't develop there. And that could be, there's certainly a lot of concerns with as coastal of a community as Nahant is, with the size of the community as far as square miles, the amount of protected open space that is there, the amount of institutional space that is there. So we have to take a really sensitive look at what are all the things that are allowing development to happen, what are the reasons why development doesn't happen, and what does all of that mean for moving forward. And once we have a good understanding of what these needs are, it becomes a little bit easier to move on to number 2, which is figuring out what these goals should be. And we want to have types of housing that are consistent with what the community has. We are not interested in destroying the character of this beautiful town that you all live in. We want to make sure that anything that's done enhances the character and also meets the regional needs for housing. There are numerical goals for annual housing production based on U.S. Census data. Some of that stuff was talked about a little bit earlier as far as numbers that could be hit in order to achieve some of these goals that the state has set under 40B. And really, we want to make sure that the goals are in line with what the community wants and the community needs, and of course all make sense from within the legal framework that we're working in. We don't have a whole lot of ability to reinvent the wheel outside of what the state allows us to do. So we have to have a lot of creative solutions to be able to say, this is what needs to happen, this is what we're allowed to do, and this is how we're going to make it the best for Nahant. So we don't have any kind of boilerplate, one-size-fits-all strategies that we come in here and mildly tweak. We start from the ground up. We want to talk to people. We want to really understand what the concerns are in the community and use those to put forward the affordable housing goals. How do we make those goals happen? Through implementation strategies. That's going to be part of requiring the opportunity sites, that identifying the opportunity sites that are required for this plan. We have to take a look at the zoning and see what sorts of zoning strategies we can have that'll allow things to move forward to achieve those goals. We have to be looking at allocating resources and programs to housing and raising awareness of housing needs and opportunities throughout this entire process. So it's something where, everything that happens and every person that is a part of this process ensures that the end result is greater than the sum of its parts, right? Having an HPP that accomplishes these goals really gets down in writing what the community's vision of it for what it's going to be. And especially for you folks that told us, that you've been in this community for a long time, many decades. You've seen the change, you've seen what's happened, you've seen the ways that it stayed the same. And that's the kind of knowledge that's really going to be helpful as we go ahead and look forward and say, what are the next 10 or 20 years of housing in Nahant? What do they need to look like based on all the things that you all have seen happen? And being able to hopefully turn that into some actionable stuff. And Christian, if you could go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about what this process looks like. We have 4 big buckets of how everything looks. And within this advisory committee, you guys are going to be playing a big role in all of this as well. The first bit is data, which is a part of the HNA, the Housing Needs Assessment, looking at all the development constraints and opportunities, doing lots of GIS work, census data work, figuring out what we need to do. The next part is the public outreach, where we want to hear back from the community. We have a couple open house forums planned. We have some focus groups that we're going to be getting underway sometime soon. We've talked about potentially launching some community surveys if we feel like that could be an effective tool to gather back feedback. We're going to be turning all of that stuff into recommendations. Those are the goals and strategies and implementation plan for how to actually get this stuff done, because we don't want it to be a plan that sits on the shelf. We want it to be actionable and realistic and able to be put together in a way that things can actually get done. And as part of that is also going to be the opportunity site selection as well. And then when it's all said and done, this time next summer, we're going to be presenting to local boards. We're going to be submitting to the state for approval. And then in the case of the 3A zoning, there's some other steps that have to be taken as well. And we'll get to that shortly. If we can hit the right arrow one more time, we're going to see that all of the stuff is going to overlap with the community visioning effort for the 3A zoning effort. That's going to be taking place in the fall and winter 2022-2023. So both of these efforts are going to be taking place in tandem, and the 3A component is going to be part of the HPP in addition to being its own standalone thing. We felt like it made a whole lot of sense, since we're talking housing stuff, to do all of this housing stuff at once. They're very complementary items, and the more we talk through it, I think you folks are going to see where all that stuff lines up a little bit more. And next, we're going to go on to the next slide and address a little bit of what we're calling some key context. And these are some just interesting stats and charts that we pulled really quickly that are not a full housing needs assessment. However, they do give us some thoughts on what exactly is necessary here when we're looking at some really basic surface level data. And the first thing I want to do is draw your attention to the chart that's over here on the right. This is the income that's needed to not be cost burdened by rent or mortgage. And cost burdened is a term that is used by the census, it's used by HUD. It means that more than 30% of your pre-tax income goes towards your housing cost. In the blue, we see the median housing income in Nahant, which is about $94,000. If you want to rent in Nahant based on what people's rents are, you need to make at least $68,000, $69,000. If you want to buy a home with a conventional mortgage where you put down a 20% down payment, you need to have a household income of $230,000. And if you use a mortgage with a low down payment, such as these FHA loans that require 3% or something like that, it means that there's less money to put down as a down payment, but it also means that your mortgage is going to be bigger because you don't have that down payment taken off. That means that somebody would need to be living in a household making about $260,000 in order for them to qualify for a low down payment mortgage. It's a pretty big gap between what things look like and what you were going to need if you were going to buy today. So what I would encourage everybody to do is think about yourself and think about your neighbors and start asking yourself, if I didn't already live here, would I be able to afford to move here? And in a lot of cases, we find that the answer to that question is, well, probably not, because a lot of the challenges that exist between the folks that were able to buy when the land was much cheaper, the houses were much cheaper than they are now, And of course, the anecdote is always like the best time to buy is always 5 years ago, right? But when we take a look at this and we see what this looks like for the context now, and people are asking questions about, well, what do I do if I want to stay here as I get older, something that planners call aging in place. And then you're looking at all these heating costs that are continuing to go up. You're looking at the property taxes, which even if the rate stays the same, if the value of your home goes up, the property taxes will go up as well. And even just staying in place has a lot of financial challenges that a lot of folks aren't prepared for. And what we saw was that the Nahant population has increased slightly from 2010 to 2020, up to about 27,000 people.
Not true.
Not true?
Not true.
Oh,
What are we saying is not true? The population didn't go up?
Roughly 3,400.
or less.
3,400 less.
No. 3,400 as as an estimate of the total population.
Right.
You're right. These are not the right numbers. The increase did go up, but these numbers are incorrect for whatever reason. It is about 3,400. You are the smallest municipality in the state, I believe, if not the region for sure.
In land area, not in population.
Land area, yes. 13% of the residents are under 18 and 28% of the residents are over 65. So we know it's a community that is old and is getting older. There's not as many young families here as there probably used to be, based on the way that I've heard a lot of anecdotal comments from you all today about what it was like growing up there. Over the same time, we've seen home sale prices increase by 46% in the last 10 years. And for single family homes, that median sales price is now about $700,000, which is pretty significant. There's a big unmet housing need where 40% of households are low income, earning 80% or less than the area median income. For those of you that aren't familiar with that term, that is used by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And what they do is they look at the metro regions across the country, and they say there's a median income based on households and family size. And if you are earning 80% or less than that, then you qualify as low to median income. And it's broken down by 80%, 50%, and 30%. For the greater Boston area, that number is, I want to say 140,000 for a family. It's going to vary a little bit based on family size, but we know that 40% of the households in Nahant are earning 80% of that or less. So it classifies them as low income.
With respect, I think that in light of the earlier error about the population, you might want to do a reality check on that 40% number, because that strikes me as being very high in terms of a low income population.
It's not correct.
Well, when we look at what it has for the median household income of $94,000 throughout the region, that is considered a low income number for a household. And it may not seem like it because they're all based on how things look. And greater Boston is a relatively wealthy area. If we were looking at a city like Indianapolis or Milwaukee or Portland, Maine, that number is going to be much different. The median costs are going to be much lower. What we want to really hammer home here is that the idea of low income does not mean somebody who is living on government assistance. It doesn't mean a Section 8 household. It means in comparison to the rest of the greater regional community. And as a lot of you know, greater Boston has a lot of households that have more than one working adult who have six-figure incomes. So it's not unusual to see a household that could have an income of $160,000, $170,000. However, the median household income in Nahant is $94,000, and a big part of that is the disparity between the residents who are over 65. That's a third of them, so their income is going to be fixed. It's going to be lower than folks who are working, and it's going to skew those figures a little bit. So it is a median number. It is not necessarily reflective of, we're not saying that the average household in Nahant is making $94,000. There could be a very big gap one way with very high income, and then retirees and folks who are on a fixed income, maybe living off of a pension or Social Security or something like that. For a lot of these folks, their homes are already paid off, so they don't have to worry about mortgage costs. They need to worry about the rising costs of goods and inflation, as well as making sure that they can stay in their home, as we talked about before. The property taxes rise, the energy costs rise, things like that. but it's a big difference between what we tend to think of when we think of low income and what the government classifies as low income. And it's a big difference just anecdotally and data wise, and that's why it looks the way that it does. We know that
I think those numbers are correct, are pretty close to it. Because we had gone through this process a number of years ago, and my recollection is that it was right around that.
We'll say, when we progress through the planning process here, we're really going to be digging into the data and having a lot of folks look at that. But one of the really big benefits that we have working with you as committee members who have the experience on the ground is to help us vet this information, before we present it to the public at large at forums, or it makes its way into the reports. There's a lot of checks and balances. So we do appreciate, you commenting on some of these. And, when we get into the housing needs assessment, we'll really be digging into a lot of the data.
Great, thank you.
So what was mentioned a little bit before our presentation, Tony had talked about the subsidized housing stock of affordable housing. And there's a 10% goal that's set by the state of Massachusetts under Chapter 40B. Nahant has less than 4% of the town housing stock in the subsidized housing inventory. And that number is going to fall even further. It's likely going to fall for all communities throughout the region once those numbers get updated to include 2020 census numbers. They're still using 2010. So what this means is that there's a bit of a ways to go to hit that 10%. To be able to put up something that says developers are not allowed to ignore the local zoning and kind of just do whatever they feel makes sense. And in order to make all this stuff work, we need to really be mindful of that and mindful of what the goals are that the state has set, and hopefully do everything that we can in the process to get to the point where you guys are the ones that are having control over the future of the town, and not some developer who wants to come in from the outside.
Could you please address the difference between the subsidized units you're talking about versus the affordable units that are part of the conversation? They're not one and the same, are they?
I can comment on that if you want, John.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
So, yeah, you're right. They're not the same. The way that 40B works with the subsidized housing inventory is, when a development's built, a certain percent of it is required to be what's called deed restricted affordable housing, where that's legally required to cost no more than 30% of a household's income. But if as a part of that development, there's market rate rental units, even though they're not deed restricted affordable, they would count on the subsidized housing inventory. So it depends on how those units that are on the subsidized housing inventory got there and were built. But generally speaking, yes, SHI is not always indicative of how much affordable housing, truly affordable housing, deed restricted affordable housing a community has.
So in the affordability aspect of it, is that what you were talking about when you talked about the 3.8% or less than 4%?
Yeah.
Is that, or is it the subsidized that you're referring to?
We are referring to the subsidized in that instance, because that's the subsidized housing inventory, and that's where that has to be the 4% of that 10% goal. And you're right, it is about 3.8%. It's a little bit under 4. So that's the stuff that goes into the SHI that the state looks at. It is the stuff that is restricted, that has to be affordable moving forward. And it's a little bit different than if, for instance, a private landlord just had a unit that they were setting the rate on for their rent at a little bit lower than market rate, or at a place where it would be affordable just because they decided to make the rent affordable. That's called naturally occurring affordable housing, and that's not the kind of thing that we track, and that isn't part of these conditions set forth by the state, because there's nothing that requires that it remain affordable forever. So for instance, there is nothing that would be stopping that landlord from increasing the rent next time the lease term is up, and nothing stopping them from increasing it to market rate or beyond market rate if the tenant decides to vacate and a new tenant comes in and a whole new lease is drawn up. So we're really talking only about the stuff that is officially subsidized, the stuff that is deed restricted, the stuff that we can say for sure this is affordable and it's going to stay affordable long into the foreseeable future.
Specifically, Jim, that 3.8% is made up of the housing authority properties. So it's the Spindrift, It's the bottom of Greystone Road, Spring Road, and a little bit of Emerald.
Mhm. Okay. So that's a very important point to keep that in mind, the difference between the subsidized and the affordable, because I think as a community, there will be some issues and fears around subsidized housing, but not so much about affordable housing. So that's going to be part of this conversation. But so thank you very much.
It is. Thank you for the concern and for the clarifying question, Jim. We appreciate it.
And the mechanism to achieve affordability is, at least in rental units, is that there is a deed restriction on the unit that prohibits collecting rent above a certain defined figure. And now, how does that work in the case of a unit which is sold outright? Is there a deed restriction on the price at which it can be resold by the first purchaser?
There could be. What we're primarily talking about for this is rental housing more so than for sale housing. And when you get into for sale housing, there's other deed restrictions and things like that that make things a little bit more complicated. Alex, I don't know if you have anything else to add on to that one, but
Yeah,
typically this is rental housing.
Yeah, I mean, I took a quick glance at the subsidized housing inventory for Nahant, and it's all rental, but there is affordable home ownership as well. And in both cases, essentially the rule of thumb is that whoever's the tenant or the owner of that affordable unit, if it's deed restricted affordable, it means that they're going to pay 30% of their income. But they have to be income eligible to be able to have access to that affordable housing. And I think this kind of raises a good point about, when we're dealing with housing, there's a lot of different terms that can mean a lot of different things to different people. So one of the things that we'll be doing when we start digging into the data through the housing needs assessment and start communicating with the public in larger forums is to really focus on some of those key terms so that we can all kind of have a shared vocabulary and make sure that we're on the same page and there's no confusion. It is easy to kind of get confused with all the different kinds of housing terminology. So that's something that we'll be doing through the effort to really make sure of that for our group and also for the public.
And confusion is the enemy of community engagement.
Exactly. And we want to do everything we can to cut through that noise. So please ask questions. Please let us know if things are unclear. We're going to do our best to work through all of this stuff and make sure that, we're likely going to have areas where we disagree on, what the recommendation should be or what the goal should be and things like that. But the important thing is that we're all speaking the same language and that we all understand what things mean when we're talking about them. And that is going to be one of the challenges moving forward with this.
John, I have a quick question for you. You said for the purpose of what you were discussing, you were referring more towards rental property. Did you mean, simply because we're at an introductory phase of understanding the law, you're keeping it simple and just referring to rental? Because I think that the town wouldn't want to. I think the town would want to consider affordable property for purchase as well as rental. So I want to make sure that's both in the future, that would be on the plate for this plan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the kind of thing that we're excluding. Affordable units are a challenging and different animal when they're for sale. There's the whole lottery system that people have to go through who are eligible to apply, and then all the different checks and things like that. They're a little bit more challenging to get done because usually they're part of a larger development that is a for sale development. So it's not the kind of thing that you can just say we're going to have a few apartments here. Usually those are going to be townhomes, single family homes, things of that nature. But it really depends on what the opportunities are, what the developers are able to do, things of that nature. We're certainly not going to rule out any kind of for sale affordable at all. It's going to be one of the things that we're going to be taking a look at when we go ahead and put the recommendations together. For the community as it is right now, all of the affordable housing stock in the SHI is rental. And in most communities, the majority of the housing stock that is on the SHI is rental. Is that correct, Alex?
It's not always the case. It kind of looks differently in different places, but yes, from what I can see on the subsidized housing inventory that DHCD holds, the
Yeah, currently all of Nahant.
it's rental,
is
yeah.
rental. Yep.
But as John,
I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't, that it was going to be part of the conversation.
oh yeah, certainly. I mean,
For
when
purchase and for rent.
yeah, when we start looking at the goals for the housing plan, it may emerge that one of the goals is that we want to find ways to get more affordable home ownership, and then that would lead to different kinds of strategies to achieve that goal. So that's kind of like further down the road and something that we get through all of this engagement and analysis. But yeah, it's very common in a housing plan that you'd be working towards both affordable rentals and affordable home ownership, depending on, what comes of the process and, what the community says.
Alex, can I jump in for 1 second here?
Yeah.
It sounds like we're talking about new production for all of this, whether it's rental or home ownership. Seeing that Nahant is well over 90% built out, there is not a lot of opportunities for new development per se. How do accessory dwelling units play into this, or do they at all?
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. This is a state program where they call these housing production plans, and they do involve looking at opportunities to develop housing. But depending on what community it is, it may be more so about policy and programming and different ways to create housing opportunities that are affordable that don't necessarily mean building new housing. And so one of the great ways to get housing that more people can access that meet their needs is accessory dwelling units, which is something that I've worked on and seen a lot, and John's worked on, and Beverly actually, to look at having accessory housing where you would have maybe a small cottage home in the back of a lot for a single family, or maybe within that single family home as an internal or attached accessory dwelling unit. But I really do like that as a strategy to kind of facilitate intergenerational living. If you've got seniors that maybe don't want to have to keep up with a big house anymore, but they still want to live in the community and have that sense of autonomy, or maybe live close to family with a supportive family. Maybe they have adult children who are having trouble purchasing a home for their family. So in this situation, you could have a single family home with an ADU, which could really facilitate that intergenerational living, and is kind of seen more of as creating a housing that's accessible and affordable in the marketplace. But it can also be looked at as affordable housing, which could work towards the town's SHI as well. But really, all of this stuff I love talking about, but I just don't want to be too ahead of the game here, because this is the sort of thing that we want to bring to the public and forums, and look at closely and get to as kind of more towards the end of the process when we've had all of our conversations. But I would certainly think that ADUs would be something that we'd be talking about a lot.
I mean, I just want to make a comment, because I do feel like I have spoken to a lot of the public, especially since the Coast Guard housing vote last year, and rental units it is the crisis in Nahant. And I do certainly hope we are talking about building rental units, because if you go out there and speak to people who are losing their homes right now, there is no place for them to rent, and they're certainly not in the position to buy. So I would say, for one, I sat on this committee to find alternatives for rental for people to rent in this town.
Thank you so much to you both for those comments. That certainly makes a lot of sense and certainly jives with a lot of the other things that we've been hearing. We don't want to put the cart before the horse too much on recommendations for right now. What I do want to say for members of the public, if you're not familiar with this little bit of jargon, an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, sometimes it's called an in-law apartment or a granny flat, and it is a additional housing unit that sits on your property that's all part of the same deed and the same ownership, where there is a separate living space, a separate bedroom, a separate bathroom, and a separate kitchen that is used for somebody who also typically has an outside entrance to the home. If somebody, say, wants to convert their basement into a living space or their attic into a living space and allow that person to maybe have a little bit more autonomy than grandma just moving in and being in a little bit too close for comfort in the main living areas, and allow them to have a little bit of a sense for themselves, or it could be rented out to either a family member of the public, whatever it might be, depend on how that bylaw is put together. So there's a lot of different ways that can happen, but I want to make sure everybody kind of understands what it is that we're talking about here.
So let me just interrupt briefly. I don't want to impede the flow anymore, but it appears you guys are looking to move the agenda along, and I appreciate that. My question, though, is when is it that those of us who are not already up to speed about the jargon and the programs and the terminology are going to get a chance to acquire a sufficient familiarity with these terms to be practically useful in looking at the alternatives that Nahant has or can develop?
Yeah, I mean, our next committee meeting is going to really center on the housing needs assessment, and before, kind of at the beginning of that meeting, we'll go through all of the terms together, and we can also send the committee something in advance if that would be helpful as well. But we're also going to be creating communication materials throughout the process. So we'll also be highlighting those different terms and concepts then. But I'd say at the next meeting and prior to the next meeting, we'll lay it all out for you.
Alex,
Thank you.
I also just wanted to jump in really quickly and say that from the community engagement perspective, which we'll talk about a little bit in more depth later in this presentation, developing that shared understanding of the things that we're talking about is a really important part of any of the engagement activities, regardless of how widespread they are in the community, like forums to focus groups. It's a really important part of that, so that we know that when people are giving us feedback, that they are doing it from a place of shared understanding, so that they feel like they have the information at hand to be able to actually contribute to the process. So again, we'll talk about that more later, but it is definitely a component of all of the engagement strategies that we develop for the projects that we're on. So it is part of that. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I think the website which that we're developing has like a glossary on it, does it not?
It doesn't have a glossary. It has an FAQ section.
FAQ.
And there's some links to other resources that the state has put together that speaks exactly to what you're talking about, Mike, where it kind of lists out, these are the programs, this is what they are, this is what it means. And we'll be covering a lot of that in a little bit more friendly terms when we talk to the public at the engagement meetings and things like that, and make sure that anyone that has concerns can just kind of pull us aside and say, what is going on? What does this mean? It's all Greek to me, and we'll talk our way through it. So we want to make sure everybody feels empowered to have these conversations so that we can go forward and really approach all of this from a perspective of feeling like we're doing a lot to make the community better. And we don't want anybody kind of just going through the motions and saying, yeah, whatever, I guess that sounds fine to me. That's not the kind of thing that we want to do here. We want to make sure everybody comes away from this experience feeling like not only that they've learned a lot more, but that the value that they've added to the process has real, tangible, important value, and not any kind of just like tokenized value or, hey, cool, thanks for coming out, we're glad you made it. Not that kind of stuff. We really want to move people up this sort of ladder of citizen participation and make sure that everyone's voices are heard in this process.
So let me distinguish a couple of things. Next session, it sounds as if is going to be when those of us who are on the committee and somewhat new to these concepts are going to get the bulk of our education. And that's great. That's facet one. But it also sounds to me as if you guys are anticipating that the members of the community who are going to attend these interaction sessions that are contemplated and who are going to provide input and feedback on whatever we develop and present, or let's say inputs to at the front end of what we develop, are going to need some familiarity with the vocabulary and so forth themselves. And most people don't have it. So how are we going to cross that bridge?
Yeah, I mean, no, that's a great point. And you know, we want to make it as simple as possible for the average person. And you know, these terms get wonky, so we're going to break it down to a level where we can just, you know, communicate neighbor to neighbor. So we'll utilize infographics. We'll utilize, you know, kind of simple concepts. You know, in some communities, you know, we found, you know, to give you an example, we'll say like uppercase A affordable housing is the deed restricted affordable housing that's required to be affordable. Lowercase a affordable housing is housing that's in the marketplace, but is affordable just by being in the marketplace. And there's certain characteristics of housing, like an ADU, for example, that may make it more of an affordable home in the marketplace. So we'll make it visual, we'll make it simple. You know, we'll bring this into all of our engagement, and that really is a principle of how we approach, you know, engaging the community, is to make sure that we're having informed conversations, not just about the housing terms, but also with some of the data and that we're looking at, so we can make both data-driven and public-driven decisions together.
So I just add another element here. How about I owned at one point when I was young a 221D3 co-op unit that was affordable because my wife and I were at the time were quite low income. Are those co-ops part of any of this thinking, and condos in some way?
Yeah, again, I think, you know, co-ops are another strategy that we might look at down the road to create affordability. And sometimes that doesn't always mean producing homes. It could be looking at forming co-ops or other kinds of ways to organize and kind of break down costs and separate the cost of housing from the cost of the land. So that's kind of a nice example of how the housing plan could have strategies that don't exactly mean producing developing new housing, but could be looking at how do we make the existing housing stock more affordable, or kind of work with what we have, understanding that development is highly constrained in Nahant.
Okay.
We're going to go ahead and pivot now to the 3A introductory portion. Christian, if you could advance the slides. And this is, again, the multifamily zoning requirements for MBTA communities. This is a brand new thing that the legislature rolled out, and then the Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, released guidelines for. And really what it means is that they want any community that's served by the MBTA, be it bus lines, subway lines, commuter rail lines, or a community that is next to a community that's directly served, needs to do some changes to their zoning to allow for more multifamily units to be built. Multifamily could be apartments, it could be condos, it could be a handful of different things. So with this new zoning, multifamily has to be allowed by right somewhere. The zoning has to be amended in Nahant for 86 units. In other communities, it's substantially more than that. It's often based on a percentage of units of population or something like that. We can't have any age restrictions on it, so it can't be intended only for seniors or something to that effect. It has to be suitable for families with children, so that would speak to how we zone the regulations for what the minimum apartment sizes would be, or number of bedrooms, things like that. The final guidelines were released by DHCD in August of this year, and we've been doing a lot of phone conversations and Zoom webinars and internal team meetings to try and figure out what are the best ways we can move forward on all the different projects that we have that are 3A compliant stuff, and trying to make sure that we understand this new law as best as we possibly can. And everything as far as how the zoning options are, nothing's predetermined here. And the outcome could change, could be a change to an existing zoning district. We might have a new zoning district. We could have potentially what's called an overlay district, which sits on over top of existing zoning and saying the zoning is what it is, but within this overlay district, the regulations change a little bit and this is what they look like. So there's a lot of other stuff that goes into this and a lot of other regulations, but these are kind of the gist of what it looks like. And Christian, if you can go on to the next slide, we'll see how all the communities in the region break down. Nahant is considered a adjacent, a little adjacent community, adjacent small town right over here. And it's not served by either the rapid transit, the purple, I'm sorry, it's not served by the commuter rail, the purple line, and it's not served by the subway lines either. There's a single bus route that serves the community, and then of course next door in Lynn, there's a commuter rail access up there. So it's an adjacent small town due to the population, rail access through a neighboring community only. If the population was larger, it would be an adjacent community that had rapid transit or commuter rail options. It would fall into one of these categories here. Anything that is not shaded in, we see some stuff kind of out west. Those are communities that are not served by the MBTA, either not directly, and an adjacent community is not served either. So they're the ones that are exempt from these requirements, in addition to the city of Boston, which already has multiple zoning classifications that would meet these requirements. So they are exempt under 3A because they've already done a lot of the work that they're asking of the suburban communities. Moving forward to the next slide, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of our engagement efforts and some of our thought processes around moving forward. So I'm going to kick it back over to Christian, and he's going to talk about this.
Hey, everybody. So I just want to appreciate how much you have actually already brought engagement into the conversation. I will say that sometimes that is a rare occurrence in some of the communities that we work in. So I really appreciate how clearly front and center this is for all of you. So I just want to quickly go over some of the engagement strategies that we use in our projects, and also some of the things that we are planning. You can think of this as sort of a up to like including and with additional engagement efforts to be sort of tailored to the sort of like needs of people in Nahant. And also sort of, you know, we leave ourselves a little bit of flexibility to really develop an engagement strategy in collaboration with all of you, because you, as people who live in Nahant, are experts on what people in the community might need or who to talk to in the community, for instance. And so that's not necessarily expertise that I bring to this conversation because I don't live in Nahant. So generally speaking, when MAPC's engagement staff develop a strategy, we really start with a comprehensive stakeholder analysis and resource mapping. So what this means is that we work with the committee or other stakeholders to identify organizations, listservs, community groups, you know, people about town, and other resources that would be useful people to connect with in this process, useful resources to engage with in this process. I like to think about community members who I call super connectors. So these are people who, you know, some communities have like a Resident of the Year award. These might be people who have won that. I don't think Nahant has something like that, but I will stand corrected if you do. But you know, the super connectors are people who have really extensive connections and networks in Nahant, and it actually sounds like a lot of you have those things already, which I'm sure is the reason why Tony, it's one of the reasons at least why Tony invited some of you to participate on this committee with us. So we really start by thinking like who do we, like what resources, both sort of people wise and otherwise, do we have that we can engage with and really collaborate with. We also developed some messaging and branding in collaboration with our communications team. You can see in the top right corner, there's the Housing Production Plan logo. We found that this is really helpful for sort of orienting people to materials so that they know there's like a coherent visual identity to the work that's going on so that people can recognize it when they see it. And then the other thing that we do in all of our work is we develop facilitation guides, excuse me, and facilitation plans for all of our public engagement. So these are detailed sort of plans that will help all of us understand what is going to be accomplished at each meeting or each focus group or whatever. And so this is really intended to make sure that we're dotting all of the I's, crossing all of the T's, we're including the types of information presented in the way that's most helpful for the people who are participating in the event, whatever that is. Specifically in our scope, we do have some engagement things specifically laid out. So that includes 2 public forums and several focus groups with key stakeholders. And the scope does also include a community survey. So these things are things that we will develop in the course of the project, of course, obviously with collaboration from all of you. And they're really intended to sort of maximize the sort of bang for your buck, as it were, in terms of like what we reasonably can accomplish in this project and the sort of breadth of people that we'll be able to reach. The other thing I'll just mention is that all of the data that we gather from these will be treated like actual data. So, you know, all of the conversations that we have with community members, the feedback that we get at public forums, the survey, focus groups, all of that is really rich qualitative data and stories about people's experiences and life in Nahant. And so we treat it like that and treat it as something that should be really combed through, synthesized, and incorporated into the final deliverables. So the last part we already sort of touched on a bit earlier, but it just bears repeating that, you know, all of our engagement efforts are really designed to be both like a two-way street. So not only are we hoping to get information from people, we also know that you know, not everybody will understand what 40B is, not everybody will understand what 3A is, and we'll need to be able to communicate that in a way that is sort of accessible and, you know, like at the level that is most helpful for people who are providing feedback. And that obviously includes all of you, but it definitely includes the people who we talk to in focus groups, the people who we talk to at some of the public forums and otherwise. So what I will say is that, you know, we don't like to come in to projects with an engagement strategy already developed because so much of it is dependent on who we're working with in the specific community. And so that is the engagement strategy is something that we'll be refining in collaboration with all of you and sharing back with you to make sure that what we're thinking of doing engagement-wise makes sense and also plays on some of the existing resources and folks who are in town. So that's kind of a summary of the key engagement efforts. Again, this is sort of like a inclusive list. So it's not an all-inclusive list. So there are like the universe of things that we could do expands beyond some of the things that you see listed here.
Christian, will these public forums and focus groups be in a public forum, or will they be on Zoom?
I believe, John, I don't know if the scope specifies. I will defer to you, John, if you have that in front of you, because I can't look at it while I'm also sharing my screen, or it will pause the screen sharing.
I do think the scope says that we assume that all meetings are going to be virtual. However, we do have a little bit of flexibility with this.
Yeah.
We aren't making a whole lot of assumptions on this. We are going to probably keep these committee meetings virtual just for the sake of the budget and making sure that all the planning team members can be here. But as far as public forums go, we are open to doing that in person. That's one of those things where we're just kind of keeping an eye on, safety levels and comfort levels within the community and things like that. And it's something that Tony and us have already kind of had some conversations on, and I think it's very likely we're going to do at least one in-person event.
Right. And I guess I see, Michelle, your hand is raised. I just really
Yeah,
quickly.
I was just going to share that with the MBTA communities, multifamily community meetings that they've been hosting, and I've been attending some of those focus groups have been as many as 200 people over Zoom. And they've been able to facilitate those large meetings pretty well. I've been actually really pleased by some of the activity that's gone on. But I do advocate that we do need in at least one or two in-person meetings for residents, because I think it's really important that you can connect with people at that level. A lot of us who work with digital applications, digital means are probably going to be fine over Zoom. So offering both will be a benefit to the community.
Yes, I completely agree. I could not have said it better myself. I think one of the benefits of doing something on Zoom is that you can record it really easily and post it otherwise. I have a lot of experience running hybrid events as well. I actually just facilitated a hybrid meeting on Monday in Cohasset. So, but I think for the two public forums, we haven't really decided one way or the other. I think it really depends on what would be most beneficial for folks in the community. And I think what you mentioned, Michelle, is that we've seen a lot of people participate virtually. It's very convenient for some folks. Obviously, like all of us can be doing this from our office or from our homes instead of traveling to the meeting space. But also understanding that like virtual is not a panacea. We can't engage everybody that way. So yeah. The other thing I just I was going to respond to something else that you asked, Mark, and I can't remember. Oh, the focus groups. Likewise, we've done both in-person and virtual focus groups. It really depends on what is easiest for the people who we're inviting. I sometimes find that virtual focus groups are convenient because it's a lot easier to schedule them. But given that Nahant is geographically very small, it's not quite the same as asking people to travel from all over, like Plymouth, for instance, the largest community in the state geographically. So we'll similarly adopt a similar approach to sort of like making sure that the focus groups are really designed in such a way that it makes it easy for people for the intended audience to get there.
I'd just like to mention back in 2008, when we went through the whole process of the Coast Guard housing, Mark went from home to home. I don't know how many groups he led, and he did a terrific job. And we were very successful back in 2008, passing something that was controversial, certainly very controversial when we started out. But by the time we got to town meeting, because of that kind of outreach, we were able to come together and have a majority support that development. From this conversation tonight, I've become more worried than I was when I came into it, and that is because of the discussion of subsidized housing and all this stuff. This will be quite controversial, and I think we really have to work at trying to understand what our community will accept with grace. We can't shove anything down their throat. We've been through very divisive things in this town before. I would like to think that this would not be, but I think it will be. There will be significant controversy around whatever we do. So we should just make sure that what we do takes as many points of view into consideration as possible.
Thank you for bringing that up, Jim. Mark actually mentioned the fabulous work that he did when we went on the town tour. And something that I didn't include on this slide, mostly because it's included in the scope, but it really bears a lot of we have to really figure out what it will look like. is something called a show your support training, which will be something that will help all of us develop like or get access to resources and things like that that would enable you, the committee, to do some of your own outreach and conversations with people in town. Mostly, I think that's really important, as you mentioned, Jim, that because like, you know, I could tell everyone in Nahant about 3A and the MBTA communities and do lots of door knocking on all of that. But ultimately, it's, you know, people are more willing to listen to someone who they might know than someone who doesn't live in Nahant like me. And so that's one of the reasons why that is part of this process. And I didn't include it here because it's sort of towards the tail end. And also like we have to kind of define what it will look like based on what all of you might need. But that sort of like, you know, grassroots level neighbor to neighbor conversation is definitely an element of what will help sort of push this over the edge.
I think Mark is the most experienced, so that he should do it all.
Yeah. That sounds like you've been voluntold, Mark.
Yeah, you know what, Jim? For you and everybody else who's here on this call today, I'm a real firm believer in the idea that if something is not, if it's done for you but not with you, it's done to you. And nobody wants things done to them, and nobody wants to have this idea that the state or MAPC or anybody else is going to be doing anything to their town. We understand that there's a lot of passion. We understand that there's a lot of heavy thoughts and emotion with all the things that you all have been through over the past couple of years. It's a lot for a community to endure. And I want you all to know that we are very sensitive to that. We understand that there are so many reasons that make Nahant special, why all of you have chosen for this to be the place where you've lived and worked and raised your families and had all these wonderful memories about what you love about this place. We are not here to destroy that. We are not here to tell you that things have to be a certain way. We're here because there's a problem and there's solutions to move forward with it. And it's not on us. It's not just on Tony. It's not on the select board or to come up with something and say, hey, this is just what we decided. Here's town meeting, have at it. We really want to make sure that when we are talking about what needs to happen with things moving forward, that they're decisions that we come to as a community, they're conversations that we have as a community, and perfect solutions are hard to come by. And I'm also a firm believer that perfect is the enemy of good. And we need to do all the things that we need to do in order to get to the point where the people that come to these conversations, the people that are part of this town, can look at a solution and say, you know what, I can live with that approach. I think that approach is going to be good. It may not be all the things I would hope to see or want to see for whatever reasons that may or may not be beyond our control. But get to the point where we feel like we can move forward and that we've all made this decision together. And I think that what you're saying speaks to a lot of that kind of just a core mentality about bringing everybody along and make sure that we're doing things together and that we're doing it the right way in the public eye with public input, and making sure that the voices are not just heard, but are reflected in the final planning documents and the action items moving forward.
Can I just get a little bit of local clarification before we go too much further? I've been assuming, and this is for Mark and Tony, I've been assuming that the doings of this committee are going to be in a position to have some influence over or make use of as a resource the Coast Guard housing. I understand that there's a current plan to level the existing structures and do away with the underground storage, but I don't know what that does as to any earlier town decisions about the disposition of those properties. So am I a hopeless lunatic to consider that we've got some whiteboard to write on with respect to the Coast Guard housing?
Let me just jump in there, Tony, if I could. Again, Mike, it's a good point. I'm sure that's sort of the elephant in the room for a lot of people here. It's on a lot of our minds. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves on this. I think that we need to have the housing production plan drive those discussions as we move forward. But it will certainly be part of the discussion. I think that's about as much as we can say at this point.
It is part of the discussion. It's been part of some of the preliminary discussions that we had when Tony was kind of introducing us to the town. It was one of the places that we visited on our site visit when we came here. So we've seen the Coast Guard housing. We understand the condition. We understand what you guys are working with and all the challenges that are moving towards redevelopment there. This isn't a plan about any one specific site. So I think that we're going to be looking at all potential development, any undeveloped sites, seeing what the potential is and what the constraints are and moving forward there. But yeah, the Coast Guard site is a big one, and it's something that we're giving a lot of thought to.
And just to clarify something economically, whenever you have subsidized or less cheaper than market housing, that, if you will, swims against the tide of market forces. In other words, it's an aberration to what would normally take place in a market without the influence of, let's say, 40B or 3A or whatever.
Sure.
So the objective is to provide units that are available to those of lesser means at a price that they can afford for social purposes. That's great. That comes at a price. And I guess there's one example of how that can be done, and that's what happens if a developer decides to do a hostile 40B type development, buys a piece of property, and is in a position to say, screw you to the zoning requirements, and erects a multi-family development, part of which is market rate and part of which is less than market rate. So that's one example, and I gather that the, if you will, the hit or the subsidy for the less than market rate units is absorbed by that developer. Have I got that much correct?
Yeah, yes, it would be absorbed by the developer, assuming that it is a market rate development with a affordable component, which I think is how a lot of this stuff typically plays out in this region.
Okay. And to the extent that that is not done using a private developer, what are the available, let's say, a couple of scenarios with which somebody's got past experience that is other than the one I just described? In other words, a development of subsidized housing that comes at the initiative of and at the expense of the local community. Is that ever done?
Can you clarify what the expense of the local community would mean in that case? What are you
Hey, it's
referring to?
Michelle. I think I can jump in and answer this.
Good.
Mike, to your point, yes, that can happen. There could be a collaboration with the developer and a community where funding is appropriate both at the local and state level to help build out an affordable project with market rates for private sale. Those
Okay.
projects exist. I've done some research where they've happened in Massachusetts. I can go pull it up and send it to you, but they do exist. And whether Nahant has the characteristics for something like that, I think Mr. Cruz had said, we've got to really follow this process. There's a lot of data that we need to understand first before we can get to those decisions. And Mark also highlighted as well. I would not want to use the Coast Guard housing as the precipice to a lot of our decisioning until we really understand the data that we have.
Okay, fair enough. And I meant that to be a separate question. The Coast Guard housing is, if you will, part A, and what I just asked was part B. So let's say as an alternative to the purely hostile 40B type scenario that I just described, there can be a interaction with the community and with a private developer with an objective of developing something that has got components of it in terms of affordable housing, and that kind of a initiative can qualify for grants, subsidies, et cetera, from the
Yes.
state or the feds. Okay.
Yes.
Is that right? Good. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, Mike,
Thank
that's exactly what we had during 2008 at the Coast Guard housing.
Right.
It was a friendly 40B, a proposed friendly 40B development.
Yep. Thank you.
Heather has her hand up.
I just wanted to go back to the community outreach and engagement efforts because I don't think this has to be controversial if we go about it in the right way. I feel like we can reach out to the community in a very positive way, because I truly believe this plan can be good for everyone who lives here, young and old, from generation to generation. And if we just plan it carefully, that it doesn't have to be controversial. I'm optimistic about that. I also feel like, as far as community like engagement, that we might want to talk as a committee about who we bring in to help with that, because it might not be all the usual suspects that I see the town using time and time again. It might be people who are in the background following this, I mean, for many years, who might want to be involved and help in a positive way. Things like the library and Council on Aging, like all these sort of wonderful community centers should be utilized when we reach out to our community members. And I am optimistic. I think it could be controversial, and you're not going to make a plan that's good for everyone. But I do think if we work carefully at being, inclusive, then this could be something that maybe is smooth for everybody. So, I mean, that's my hopes. I just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Heather. I really appreciate that. And that's really like what we use the comprehensive stakeholder analysis for, is to like identify the types of people that you, or organizations that you just mentioned, really take us beyond like the usual suspects. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that I'm a really firm believer that engagement should be fun. Like people should have fun when they come to public meetings. I know that sometimes those don't seem synonymous with each other, but we can really, especially if we're doing something in person, we can really think through how to do this in a way that is like realistic, but also like fun for people to engage with. Maybe there's something fun that they can do at the meeting or something like that. But I'm really appreciative of what all the things you just mentioned.
Can I just jump back on the Coast Guard housing topic that came up? And, like Mark mentioned, this committee process, could very well possibly drive that discussion. But, it is somewhat of an elephant in the room, and I just want to address it a little bit here, for those listening and for the committee members. The direction of the future use of that property has been decided by a town meeting vote. So any change to that would require a town meeting vote. So that's one thing you have to understand. Two, I went to a lot of those meetings that the Coast Guard Design and Development Committee hosted. What Mark mentioned in 2000 that was on the table for 2008 was very much, on the table as an option for them to consider this time around. The difference, from what I understand, is the pressing due date of the loan on the property. And so the town you'd lose out on some of the revenue of that property by partnering with the developer. And so that would have cut into the possibility of the town being able to pay off the loan in time. And I think that was a pretty big factor in the recommendation that committee came forward to town meeting with. Either way, it's the current process of vacating the current properties is something that we have to go through regardless of what that future use looks like, because of the current structures that are on that property. I would love if the town had affordable housing available today to move the current residents into. And I would be so happy to be able to say in a couple of years to the residents that currently live in those homes, hey, please come back to Nahant, or why don't you look at this? You know, we just built affordable housing here. You know, want you to be the first one at the door. Unfortunately, we have to go through this process of vacating the current properties and getting rid of them. And I know that that is an issue that's part of this discussion. I know that there are many residents out there wondering how these two play together. And I'm on the front lines with it. I'm trying to work with the residents there as much as, you know, we possibly can to find alternative housing in the meantime. But just so the committee knows, and just so you guys, I know it's already came up tonight, and I'm sure it's going to be a common topic of discussion. I believe that we either way, we're still gonna have to go through the current awkward process of vacating those properties and preparing them for whatever future use it might be, whether it be what's currently decided by town meeting or what could potentially be a different decision by town meeting.
Well said, Tony.
This could be a topic for another 2 hours. We've been 2 hours into it already, but it is one that is really crucial to a lot of people, including myself.
It is. Trust me, it's a tough one.
Yeah.
Just since there was a pause, I just wanted to say I joined a few minutes ago from the West Coast. I'm traveling on business, but I wanted to say hello. I will watch Pat O'Reilly, Mr. California.
Pat O'Reilly joining us from the planning board.
Planning board, yes. So I will catch up on the video when I get a chance when I'm back in Massachusetts, and hope to meet all of you in person. Is there just a question? Are we planning to continue on Zoom for the time being? Is that at future meetings? Okay.
Yes, we before you joined, we did mention that we're planning to stick to having the committee meetings at least be over Zoom. Other things TBD.
I won't ask any more questions until I've reviewed the video or the transcript, whichever comes first.
You owe us a comment of your favorite aspect of your neighborhood growing up.
Well, I grew up in Woburn, so where I grew up was suburban residential with lots of woods to play in. So I think that was one of my, but also the mix, you know, a lot of kids, a lot of older folks, just a lot of good neighbors, you know, looking out for each other. So I think that was my favorite thing. You know, I think there's sentiment, feelings. What other questions? Did we go through the questions?
That was the icebreaker question for all of us at the beginning. So
nice.
it's
Okay.
nice. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to the next slide.
Before you do that, can I just take advantage of this pause here to let everyone know I'm gonna have to sign off for the night. Full disclosure, I have a 3-week-old baby at home, and it's my turn for baby duty. But I know that John and Christian are having you all in good hands here. So I look forward to continuing to work with you throughout the process, and it's been a pleasure getting to know you a little bit and learning more about tonight.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you and congratulations.
Right.
Congratulations, Alex.
Thank you.
Get to work.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
So I just wanted to touch on quickly the sort of general timeline for this. I think the most important things to keep in mind are really the icons at the bottom of the screen that you see. Obviously, we are starting our community outreach sort of imminently, and we'll be working, the MAPC and town folks and all of you will be working on a HPP and zoning throughout that process. But we are aiming to have some of our public engagement work happen really starting at the in the winter. So potentially including this month. We'll sort of see how things shake out, but definitely getting the bulk of our engagement stuff going into the end of this year, start of the beginning of next year. And so those are around the times when we might be asking for input from you on stakeholders, and if you're interested in joining a focus group or helping to facilitate, those are all things that I would welcome. And then, of course, the DHCD's deadline you can see all the way over in the fall into winter of 2024. Excuse me, the fall of 2024 into the winter of 2025, and then town meeting in 2024. So this sort of gives you a little bit of a picture of sort of the general timeline of this process. Is there anything else?
What's the deliverable that appears to be due just about now? The bottom left.
The deliverables are like, I think in each different phase that we've included in the scope, there will be sort of, or the project team will develop memos summarizing any of the research or engagement that has happened to date.
Well, there's some other background information too.
Exactly,
We're going to be putting together like I think there's an overview process memo. The housing needs assessment will be part of it. We're going to have a memo that we're putting together on what we're calling a context communities, so peer communities within the MAPC region who will be comparing indicators with against Nahant to kind of see what are the similar communities, how have they been trending, and what sorts of approaches have they taken to solving some of these similar problems. Because of course, it's a very diverse region, and it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to take a community like Nahant and then look at a different community that has wildly different development constraints, different population projections, different levels of density, and say we can do what they did. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we're going to be looking for ways of understanding what other people have done, turning those things into summary memos, and those will be our deliverables to the town as we move forward. Yep. So they're not exactly hard deadlines for what it is. A lot of it's just trying to get all the icons to fit on the screen and give you guys kind of a decent idea as to when we're going to be providing real-time feedback to the town, and letting you all know as well that our deliverable isn't just a final plan at the end, in addition to the 3A zoning, but also discussions about it, things that we've learned, approaches that we're going to take, things of that nature. So that's what all those little deliverable icons mean.
Sorry, Tony, go ahead.
I just a little offering of background for Nahant and its typical activity as far as like committee or community engagement goes. You know, August to not even August, I would say September, you know, to May town meeting is prime time where a lot of committees are meeting, a lot of community engagement is happening, gearing up for town meeting. A lot of residents, you know, go down south during that time too. So, you know, having that virtual connection is important so we get their input, even though they may not be here. And then, you know, the most beautiful part about Nahant is summer, and you know community engagement, you know, tends to decrease a bit during the summertime because we're all enjoying the beach, and that's just the way it goes. You know,
there's nothing stopping us from doing a public meeting on the beach. I will say, just putting it out there.
So we have. I just want you to understand that when you're looking at this timeline, you know, it is set up pretty good. I think, you know, trying to stay sharp on this and getting stuff done before that, you know, May to August stretch where, you know, a lot of people tend to kind of want to enjoy themselves and their family and the environment and you know, it just not a slight, but it just tends, you know, community engagement tends to dip a little bit in those summer months.
So, John, unless there's anything else you want to add, I will go to the next slide.
Yeah, we can go ahead to the next slide. We talked about maybe talking about some of these questions. I think we're going to table them for this meeting. Most of the stuff we've already kind of touched on and heard from other committee members on, and we'll of course have another opportunity in the future to kind of talk through some of this a little bit more. And if you have any feelings on this that you feel like you need to share, or that you're not comfortable doing so publicly, please email me. I'm happy to hear those. Email me, email Christian, email Alex, and we're happy to hear what you have to say and take account into all of it as we move forward. But for right now, I think we've covered all of these in other discussion questions previously. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next advisory committee roles and expectations, which is really what we expect out of you all for being here. And what we're asking is participation in, it's going to be up to 6, I think, committee meetings. Some of that's between 3A stuff and HPP stuff. We may have them together. We may have some of them separate. We'll have to see kind of what the workload looks like during what points of the process we're around. We're going to want to facilitate conversations around townwide public events with support from MAPC staff and other folks that are going to be part of Nahant Town staff in there. And that's just going to be, we might ask for your help at a public meeting if we have something in person and we say, hey, can you be the one to address the community and talk about this, that, or the other thing? We're going to ask you all for your insight and guidance on all these different elements that go into the housing production plan, all the different content, all the activities we're going to have as far as not just engagement, but housing production activities moving forward. So we're going to have a lot of feedback loop kind of conversations that we got into a little bit at the surface level today, but I can see us having much more in-depth conversations around the appropriate levels of density, the appropriate amount of open space on a site. Should ADUs be allowed and what types and where and things like that. And we'll get into all those conversations a little bit more as we start hearing the feedback from the community and starting to turn that into actual workable policy. We're going to ask you guys to review the documents that we put together as far as the plans go, offer feedback on these draft HPP components, offer feedback on some of the draft 3A zoning language that we have, and have real, they could be easy conversations or they could be hard conversations. And I think we're going to have both, and we're probably going to need to have both in order to move this forward. And really what we want from you guys is being advocates for this HPP process and 3A processes and all the recommendations that are there. And like I said before, we want everyone to be at this point where they can say, yeah, I can live with this. I'm okay with this. So let's move this forward. And really understanding that we want everyone that comes into this community engagement process to really leave that process in a position where they're feeling as though they can approach the future of Nahant from a perspective of hope and not from a perspective of fear, because it's scary. Any kind of change in a community that you love, where you can say, I moved here, I like it here, what's going on here has really worked well for me. And when someone says things might change or they could potentially change, we get a lot of emotional responses, right? You want your home to be your home. You want it to feel like your home. You don't want cultural displacement of waking up one day and saying, yeah, I'm still in my house, but is this really my community anymore? We don't want any of that kind of stuff to happen. We want people to be in a place where they understand that what is happening is going to be done in a way that we're going to make it work for the town. We're going to make it work for the vision that the residents have for the future of this community, and get to that point where people are going to feel proud about what this next 10, 15, 20 years is going to look like moving forward, and really be in a good place where they can take ownership of this, advocate for all of this, and make sure that we are doing everything that that we can to avoid unfriendly 40Bs, to avoid anything that could be preventing residents of Nahant from not getting their fair share of state funds that get doled out, any of that kind of good stuff. So we want people here to work with us understand that these processes are tricky and intricate and delicate at the same time, and really be advocates for getting your friends involved, getting your neighbors involved. We send out a survey, talk to everybody you know, and say, please, can you do this? It's really going to help us. The more voices we hear, the stronger and more powerful these documents are. And we want everyone to have a place in this process, and we want you all to kind of share that vision that we want to bring out as forward as many people as we can in order to make this a success, and advocate for the process, advocate for the plan, advocate for the zoning when it comes through, and do everything that we really feel makes a whole lot of sense for how to make all of this stuff actually happen. So with that in mind, we're going to go on to the next steps, and what we're going to be working on, in addition to planning for the focus group engagement, we're going to be working on the HNA key findings. We're going to share that at the next committee meeting. We talked about that before, and that's going to be the primary material for the first townwide engagement event, is being able to present a lot of data and then have conversations around what does this mean, what are we going to do moving forward, how do we turn this into housing solutions now that we understand a little bit better about what the situation with the housing problems are. We're going to be planning for the first townwide engagement event. That's probably going to be winter instead of fall. I think it's very likely that that'll take place sometime in January, so we avoid all the holiday sort of schedule craziness and people being out of town and all that sort of stuff. We're going to figure out what these advisory committee meeting dates should look like. Thank you all for making sure that you were able to make yourselves available for this one. We want to, of course, have a lot more heads up moving forward, and we're going to be structuring some of these meetings around when deliverables are done, when public meetings are scheduled, so we can talk about how we're going to plan them, how it's going to work, what roles committee members are going to play, as well as be able to talk about the results and the data that we get from those meetings after the fact. So some feedback loop back and forth on all of this. And of course, we're going to continue to do so in a fully open and public venue, the same way that we are tonight. So that way members of the public can listen in, they can provide comments on what it is that we have going on. And that's our short kind of next steps on our end for what we're going to be accomplishing. And so at this point, I know that we've had a lot of this already, but I think additional questions, discussion, comments, especially about any of the stuff on the last few slides that we've covered, I'm happy to entertain those thoughts at this time.
I would like to say that when I first started anticipating participating in this committee and this meeting, I wrote down 3 things that were in the sort of the top of my mind as we begin this process. And I don't mean it. I don't mean them to be provocative or anything, but I think there are a number of levels of things that we need to consider. And so the first one was, as I mentioned before, having some way to have an open online way of communicating among ourselves and with the community, so that we have more information flowing and that people do not feel excluded from this process. So that's one thing. But the second thing is more personal. So I'll just read what I wrote down, which is, can we seek some sort of state or federal relocation funding to assist those tenants who are in the Coast Guard housing now? It seems that there might be money in the big federal government, the federal legislation that has been passed to help folks during COVID and to address infrastructure issues. We can seek the assistance of Congressman Moulton's office or Senator Markey or Senator Warren. And I'd be, if the committee wants, I can take that on as a task to go and see what I can find. And I'm hoping that the professionals who are on this project have information along those lines as well. And finally, I'm wondering if we can have at least in concept, right now, the possibility of creating a new kind of waiting list for occupancy, so that instead of the 9,700 people who are ahead of the tenants right now in the Coast Guard housing, we would have we would create a new waiting list with the current tenants at the top of that list, not at the bottom. And I don't know exactly how that would be structured, but I think we need to take these folks into consideration as we go forward in this conversation. So that's where I'm coming from.
Jim, let me just jump in for a minute here. I think all three of those positions that you're taking are worthy and important. I think we need to look at them in terms of context with this committee and what our goals and objectives are, and what our mandate is. Certainly in terms of assisting tenants and those types of things, I know that Tony is doing everything that he possibly can to do that. And I just don't want to sort of get crossed up in, some of the minutia, however important it is, with our overall goal here, is to produce a housing plan for the entire town. So I think that my suggestion to you would be to, almost as an individual, to work with Tony on, seeing if there's other assistance available for the current tenants. And also, the waiting list really comes from the Housing Authority. And that's pretty much state mandated, I believe. Dave Wilson can jump in. But I just don't want to get crossed up in, some of these other very important issues with our goal here also. So we have to be sensitive with that, I think.
Yep.
On the two quick comments, Jim, again, everyone here has underlined the importance of public engagement. So I echo what you're saying there. We just have to be mindful of the open meeting law. And if you've taken that training, you'll understand where those limits occur. And we can't risk having to get off schedule to redo a meeting because we didn't, because we had a violation of some sort. So we got to just as long as it's compliant with the open meeting law, let's do it. Green light.
Yeah.
And then on the Housing Authority piece and that list, Dave is on the call, so he can talk too. What happened with the Housing Authority is a few years ago, the process to put yourself on that list for housing changed. It used to be that you would fill out an application for each individual authority. Now it's online. You fill out one form and you actually can check off a box for each authority that you wanted to apply to. And I think you can even check all. So that, from what went to a list in Nahant of, under 100, skyrocketed to 9,700. My understanding is that there is Nahant residents do get a preference on that in the order of that list, so they're not at the bottom. And there's additional preference for those who are either homeless or in threat of becoming homeless. So part of the process that we're going through with eviction actually provides them a preference to move up the list as well. So I don't know where those residents currently sit on the list. I know that there's also a minority preference under the Housing Authority statute that might be number one in the preference order. So they may not be at the very top, but they might be right after that. I don't know, Dave, Dave, was I correct on any of that or wrong on any of that? Hold on, you gotta mute.
All
There
right,
you go.
so, yes, last couple of years, the state has mandated to do, it's called CHAMP program, where you would go in and local authority and fill out the application. So in the case of Nahant, yeah, it's preference, if Nahant resident preference, veteran, disabled, or homeless. So right now, it's all up to the state. If, when we call for a list, there's 50 people on the list, then we have to go out and ask them if, you know, if they want to come to Nahant, then we have to interview them. And that's, you know, it's costing us a lot of money to do it that way. So the only other thing that Tony was saying, yeah, only the director of a housing authority can check where you are on the list. No one else can do that. So a lot of people, residents have been asking members, you know, where we are on the list, and we can't tell them. So that discourages a lot of residents.
I'd just like to ask one element here. Can we explore the possibility of creating a list separate from the public housing authority list and say for people, a relocation list for people in this development? In other words, I think it could be two separate things, Dave. I understand your point, but what I'm asking is there any way I would like us to explore the possibility of having a list that was separate from the public housing authority.
Are you saying to get in here to be a resident?
No, what I'm saying is we have at this point 8 families who are about to be displaced on a particular property, and which will at some point be redeveloped in some way. Can we have a list that would give those people priority in occupying any of the list on that particular land? That's what I'd like to see explored. I don't know whether we know the answer. No.
So I can answer part of that. Under the current direction of town meeting to sell them as 12 individual lots. If the town is selling property, then it has to be done through a procurement process.
Mhm.
So it's got to be open market opportunity.
Right. And I guess what I'm saying, Tony, and I've expressed this to you in writing and to the other members of the committee, that my reading of the town meeting vote was to enable the selling of the property, not to require the selling. So I'm hoping that there's some way that we can revisit that, because the situation we have right now is extremely destructive. The potential is very destructive to our community. And so I'd like to I hope our leadership can find some way to not read the language of that. It wasn't a requirement, it was an enabling thing. So that's where I'm coming from.
No, you're absolutely right. As Mark said, we really don't want to. We want to make sure that we, respect the difference in those topics and try not to overlap the two, even though they are. You're absolutely right. It's not a requirement. The pressure of the finances.
Yeah.
Is the pressure. And like I said before, no matter what the future use is there, those properties have to be vacated and removed so that a future use, whatever it is, whether it be what was previously voted on or what could happen in the future, there's going to be a temporary displacement, unfortunately.
Right. So just going back to what I asked, if the committee by consensus would enable me to do research and say that I'm trying to find the answers, I'm trying to find money that would help these people, would that be appropriate?
I think not as a member of the committee, but as a resident, and I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Okay. All right.
All
And I
right.
want to have dinner too.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure everybody has time for dinner. We're pushing 9 o'clock right now, so I think the only things left on everybody's end as far as getting all of this set up is determining the officers of the committee moving forward. Is that right, Tony?
Yeah, I think what I want to do is I want to let the committee think about it, and maybe it'll be the first task at our next meeting. And like I said, we want to appoint a chairperson, a vice chairperson, and a recording secretary. So, and then
Tony,
whoever gets,
let me suggest this. If any committee members feel strongly that they want to serve in one of those 3 positions, to get in touch with you to let you know that. If there are committee members who don't want to be an officer, just a committee member, then they should let you know that, and then we could do a nomination process at our next meeting.
that sounds good.
I'm going to nominate Michelle to lead it because she's so well organized.
Thanks, Jim. And I know where that's coming from, obviously.
And I'm willing to. I mean, the least desirable is being recording secretary. Let's all face it. And I'm willing to do that if that takes the
Well,
pressure
Mark,
off.
I took it off your hands tonight because I've been taking notes while we've been going along. So I'll send those to you later.
Okay, I've been taking notes all night, so.
Michelle, Jim's comments were completely unsolicited.
I know they were. I see Heather's hand up. Heather, did you have a comment?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Do we want to take any comments from the public? Because I know we have a few members of the public that are on before we close out.
Yeah, so the way we usually do it in the Board of Selectmen meeting is I'll simply just say that, if there's anybody from the public that wants to speak, just unmute yourself, state your name and your address, and then your comment or question.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi, this is Carrie Alice Collins, Breezy Hill Terrace in Nahant, and I'm Heather's sister. I just have a quick question. I was just wondering if anybody knew when we were in compliance with the affordable housing laws. Are these new laws or really old laws?
So, are you? It sounds like you're speaking to the subsidized housing inventory, that 10% threshold.
Yes.
I don't know exactly when that was enacted, but that's not new legislation. That's been around for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And, my understanding is that Nahant has never achieved the level where they could get rid of any of these 40B developments. And I don't know if Mark or Tony have any additional historical context you can add to that, but that's my understanding.
I think you're correct, John.
Yeah.
We've never been in compliance.
Also, are there other cities and towns that are also not in compliance? Is Nahant rare?
There are other cities and towns that are not in compliance. And when I look at this list of everything in Massachusetts, it's all over the place.
Okay.
Some cities have no subsidized housing units at all on their inventory, and it ranges from that 0% all the way up to, let me see, what's the highest that's on here? It looks like it's about maybe 16, 17% are where some of these communities are at. The average is 10.1 throughout the entire state. So it's a little bit all over the place. There are some communities that are sitting right where Nahant is, around that 4%. A lot of them haven't hit the threshold that they need to, and some have hit the threshold that they need to. So the communities that are proactive and have put into place other regulations, and of course have a lot of other different development constraints, and some may have more open land where it's easier to build and things like that. So it's not always a pure apples to apples sort of comparison on here for any of this stuff, but you are certainly not alone in not being the only one that's hasn't complied.
Is there more pressure on cities and towns to get this done at this point because it is such a crisis out there?
A little bit. It's one of those things where, as there's been more awareness and more just kind of like we're starting to see the effects of what happened. And this wasn't part of the slides that we showed today, but when we look at what the housing production looked like in the Boston region from 1960 to 1990, and then we look at it from 1990 to 2020, we see a trend that kind of goes up and then sort of flatlines, while at the same time the population is just increasing and increasing, right? It's still a desirable place in the country to live. There's still a wide diversity of industries here that attract a lot of talent. So people keep moving in. We're not keeping pace with the housing production in order to meet that demand. So as a result of that, we're starting to see the legislature getting a little bit more creative in solutions to address some of this stuff. And things like the 3A MBTA communities guidelines and that legislation are part of these efforts that the state is taking to try to figure out what are some things we can do to boost the number of homes that are available. So it's been around. There is some more pressure kind of stuff. There's more conversations happening. We're seeing more communities adapting new zoning that's a little bit outside of this, or having new approaches to what they're doing. We talked about the ADU thing a little bit earlier. We're seeing more communities do that. More communities loosening restrictions on their zoning, that sort of thing. So
I definitely think zoning needs to be looked at in our town for sure.
But the other thing is, just in our neighborhood, there are lawsuits in Swampscott, big one in Manchester. Marblehead is far from compliance. Just in our area there, and here's what happens: the developer comes in and says, we're going to buy this property and we can ignore anything that you want, because not only are you not in compliance, but you do not have a plan to become in compliant. So
once we have a plan in place, that can't happen, or can that happen right now?
It's not that it can't happen, but it gives us a defense, a way to resist unfriendly 40Bs if we can show that we have a plan and that we're acting on it. And the problem with the Coast Guard housing is that a developer can come in and say, look, you owned this property. Your community owned this property. What did you do? Did you create any kind of affordable housing? And right now the answer would be no. Not at all.
Well, I mean, for me,
therefore, we're going to build this 10-story building. We're going to buy Bass Point and put up a 10-story, 500-unit building. You can't do a damn thing about it.
So the Coast Guard housing should absolutely be on the table, because these are all things that were brought up in so many meetings there, that we need affordable, we need elderly, and it was all about paying the loan. And so I just don't want to see everything turn into like no's here. Like, I want to see what the yes looks like, like the unfriendly building it. I don't want that to happen, but we need something, and we need it soon. And if we haven't been in compliance, it's definitely time. And the Coast Guard property just felt like it was the best opportunity, and it was a lost opportunity. I hope we can make up for that.
So my understanding is that this housing production plan that we're working on, if accepted by the state, as we meet certain checkpoints or make certain progress, it provides us some years of safe harbor against an unfriendly 40B. So the first step is to produce this plan, like Jim said, because then you can, put up some defense against something unfriendly.
Can I
I'm
just-
happy to see this happen because, and especially the community outreach and input, because honestly, that did not happen with the Coast Guard housing. They kept everything tight with what they needed and put it in a little package and ignored all of these cries that we're hearing now. So I'm glad it's finally happening. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie Alice. We appreciate you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to add though, I think the tone should really be focused on not preventing 40B, but really what are the benefits of affordable housing? You know, what do we want to see as a community? Because I think, you know, it only goes so far to hold this looming threat of a 40B developer over the community. And, you know, we haven't seen that for decades where this law has been in effect. So, you know, we can always fight off, and I think it just gets people's dander up to say, okay, we can always fight off a 40B developer. But I think it's really about what are the benefits of affordable housing, subsidized housing to the community, and you know, where do we want to be in 10, 15 years after a plan is executed?
Any other thoughts or comments from the members of the public? I think we're good on our end, Tony.
Well, great job, MAPC, great job, committee, and those listening in. I mean, for the first meeting, we had a lot of great conversation, a lot of great questions and comments. And, you know, I think I'm pretty happy with the group that we have here. It seems like we got a lot of passionate and thoughtful minds on the committee. So I'm pleased with the first meeting. Really, the question is when, I'll ask MAPC, when should we be looking to have our next meeting? In 2 weeks, in 3 weeks?
I think we're going to want to have the housing needs assessment taken care of before then. So we'll look at the end of the month or beginning of next month and start to figure things out from then. So for right now, everyone who's on the committee, please think about what your availability dates are for that, and we're going to take a look at the other committee schedules and what their availability is, and we'll kind of let you all know as far as what some of the potential available dates could be, and we'll take it from there. So look for an email from me. I'll send a follow-up after meeting with everything. Mark, if you have your notes and minutes on this, if you can get those to me as soon as possible, I'll get those out to everybody. And then I'll also send over some additional supplemental information based on some of the conversations we've had today, and sort of set some further steps for what we should be thinking about moving forward.
Can I add one thing? I really like the logo, whoever created it.
Yeah.
It looks good.
That's our communications department. They took my very rough sketch of like, can we have
Good job.
so like Nahant looks like Nahant with 1A for little Nahant and 1A for big Nahant, and
Totally clever. I love it.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yeah.
I really like the houses.
Nice.
Very
Very nice.
We really do
Dig it.
appreciate it.
Dinner time?
All right. So any member could motion
I move-
to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Seconded.
Second.
Can we have a roll call vote?
Yeah, so I'll just read the
That's a good
name.
one, yes.
Yeah. Let Tony read the names and just confirm.
Okay. Heather Goodwin,
Yes.
Mark Cullinan,
Yes.
Patty Karras,
Yes.
Dave Wilson,
Yes.
Jim Walsh,
Yep.
Mike Raworth,
Yes.
Pat O'Reilly,
Yes.
and Lynn Spencer,
Yes.
and Michelle Capano.
Yes.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Night,
night.
everyone.